Oftentimes when we talk about public-private partnerships, we're talking about bringing together government and the private sector. But in that matrix is often a very complicated relationship because government comes with the role of safeguarding public interest and, of course, oftentimes carrying the banner of being somewhat of a regulator as well. And so it goes from being regulated to participant in the space, and of course there must be oftentimes legislative and policy frameworks that guide that relationship and in combing through a lot of that complexity. But I want to give you all an opportunity to perhaps reflect on what you think what the true power of a public-private partnership is and how to bring it about, particularly where there's great opportunity but great misunderstanding as well between the various players in the sector. Sam, I'll begin with you.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to join all of you today. So obviously my comments are going to be framed in the context of nuclear energy projects. And typically, I think that there is a misunderstanding or a perception that nuclear projects can only be pursued by governments. So I think that this is exactly the right conversation to have, because I think the partnership between governments that recognize the long-term opportunities, the social benefits, the socio-economic development opportunities of nuclear projects come hand to hand with private industry, whether it's the financiers that are going to support these projects, also the private energy users, the off-takers that are going to use this 24/7 affordable carbon-free energy. So this is in my mind, and we will discuss in more detail, I'm sure, the different frameworks, the different opportunities, how governments can work together with the private financier and the users to actually optimize these projects. But it is a perfect ecosystem where it is essential to recognize the social values of these projects together with the, financial and growth opportunities that they bring.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Andrew, what's your reflection on what brings about the best forms of it, and particularly where there's great misunderstanding?
Okay, so first of all, thank you for bringing me here and being part of this panel, and through the Africa Energy Week, participating in this very interesting topic. So globally, the PPPs has started in the 80s or 90s in the US, in the UK, started just only by the toll roads and concrete and steel, let's say. And then it evolved even in the UK by creating partnerships in the healthcare and in schools and stuff like this. So let me tell you that now we are in the 2020s. We're not talking now about a privilege or about a luxury. It's a necessity that we need to have in our countries to bridge the gap that we've got. So almost all studies are telling right now that we've got 100 billion of USD of financing gap for the infrastructure in Africa yearly. So neither grants or aids or loans or even government budgets can never bridge this huge financing gaps. And this can never even bridge or deliver the promises that we've got to our people. So what we are seeing right now is, it's not a choice, but however, for every PPP, let's ask first the most important questions. Is it commercially viable? And is it socially valuable? If it answers these two questions, so let's take it from there and talk about the challenges that we're facing. The challenges that we're facing right now, first of all, are the governance. The governance is the most important thing. So now the governance gaps, it's this is the oxygen that we use, the currency of the PPPs worldwide. So when we talk about the governance gaps, I'm talking also about the political risks. So this is the second challenge, is the political risk that we're facing in some countries. The bankability is absolutely, and Mr. Haytham will be talking about this much more in details, and the capacity constraints and very, very, very long timelines.
Yeah.
So normally what we need right now to resolve this is we need transparent and legal frameworks. We need complete units for the PPPs in every country. We need people who can really structure complex contracts for the PPP models in several countries. We can see this in several countries who already succeeded in Europe, in the US, but let's not copy and paste. Let's create our own model based on our own reality. So this is what we're saying. I'm seeing like now the good challenges that we're facing. The last but not least is the FX. And because the revenue streams normally come in local currency, however, the investment itself come in the foreign currency. So like I said, a good PPP is not just about shifting risk, it's about sharing the risk. And governments, I guess, should need to see this and understand this, that it's not about dumping the risk on the private sector, but it's sharing risk with them. And if we get the governance right, and if we share risks fairly, and we place the people at the center of the deal, so I'm sure we will not have only billions of dollars of investments, because Africa doesn't lack capital. We've got the capital. But we are not going to have just billions of dollars, we will have billions of opportunities, and it's going to be clear and net and transparent in front of everyone. So the question now is, can Africa, it's not about Africa can leverage the PPPs. No, I mean are we bold enough to make it happen, and how we will? And I believe one day we will make it happen clearly and more faster than what we have now.
Yeah. Haytham, you're the banker here. Bankers love the word risk, particularly when it comes to shared risk. But oftentimes, governments don't always have the sort of capital and liquidity to be able to have skin in the game, so to speak, as private players often do. What does shared risk look like in a public-private partnership?
I think you used the right word, skin in the game. And it's very critical for this. So it comes with a lot of benefits. Once, we're not loading governments heavily if the project they carry it alone, and we're not putting it totally on the private sector while they suffer under licensing and the whole thing. The mix between public and private always works very well for us, because it gives the best of both worlds, the government umbrella, skin in the game, and also the private power, discipline, governance. Because if you look at it, we keep talking about the gap in financing infrastructure, oil within the continent. But really, if you look at the number we have, it's a bit messy. Like, Africa is 17% of the population of the world, yet they consume 3.5% of the energy of the world. The rightful share is 17%. And the 3.5 happen because they extract only 6% of the world, and they give up a lot of it because to extract, you need to give part of your oil as a concession, and then to refine, you give another part. You end up with like 30% of your oil to consume, and the rest gifted for making it ready for you. This is where we ended at 3.5. And the only way to fix it is not by using public all the time or going private and put them at risk. This is important. The main thing is only not public-private, is the mix we're trying to do now. How can we get the government, the public, but also attract foreign funds to support them both? And you know, the risk perception of Africa is what making us pay per kilowatt per hour much more than anywhere in the world, because we pay more for the funds in this continent than anywhere in the world. So we had a lot of good examples where either constructing a dam, or where we did pipelines, or we actually worked with government and private sector to acquire foreign assets on the upstream. They're always very successful example. As you said, the mix gave us the right control between government protection and the private sector nimbleness and agility, which is very good for the finance and mitigating the risk.
Yeah. His Excellency Gabriel, I think part of the incentive that a private player would have to go into a public-private partnership with a state or a government entity is that you hope that the government would be lenient in terms of its policy flexibility and or stability, very importantly, and that it won't abruptly overnight change those positions, because it would adversely impact its own investment, whether monetarily or otherwise, in the partnership. And the government's incentive is, well, they come with expertise, liquidity, and the agility to be able to deliver, hopefully within budget and on time. But those things aren't always true on both sides. We assume that of each other. And so that trust factor matters. As someone who's played on both sides of that matrix, How do we ensure that that trust factor remains intact?
Okay. First of all, I want to thank you for inviting me to this panel. I think the biggest advantage that I could have and other former ministers have is to be able to be on both sides and understand. I think one of the biggest problems that we have to be able to achieve that it's an honest conversation, because we forget that there is different parties. There is the government party, there is the banker party, there is the operator party, and each one of them, they speak in different language, and they have different demands. And we all commit our own mistakes. We need to recognize our mistakes. I'll give you the best example. You started with governments. Governments don't do their homework. Before the financiers arrive and the operator, they need to get the project prepared. They need to understand and tell them what do they want. And they just sit there and say, okay, just tell me what do you want. I'm the government, I'm the one supposed to be telling you what do I want. The operators, or either the operators have the problem too, because when they come to the government, they come to sell a project. They don't even look into what's the plan of development of the governments. So they also are thinking on just selling the project so they can have the revenues. And then on the issue about the banking, it's a little bit more complicated, but they also have the issue because the funds doesn't have to come always out of the country. There's a lot of funds in country. There's a lot of people who think that Africans don't have funds, but we pay taxes all the time. We have funds in country. The problem is after we pay, we don't know how to use it. So the conversation between the three parties are very important. And I will start with the first one that is what do the government want? I mean, the governments, and you say something that is very important, governments keep changing all the time, but the priorities keep saying the same thing. We want electricity, we want jobs, and we want industrialization. They keep saying the same thing. So the private sector, they need to focus how we can achieve that to the government. And the biggest mistake that I have seen is that when somebody tried to do a PPP project for energy, they focus on the Minister of Energy or the Minister of Oil, and that's a mistake. The more important minister is not the Minister of Oil, it's not the Minister of Energy, it's not even the Minister of Finance, it is the Minister of Planning. The Minister of Planning of all those countries are the ones who know the 5 years plan. They know what each one are the requirements. And unfortunately, I don't want to speak on behalf of Equatorial Guinea. I am not a minister there. But that's one of the things that it is missing. Those ministers of planning are the ones that actually can give the tools to the bankers, to the operators, and to the investors when they come. Because if, for example, the government decides that they want to develop in a specific area, they know that they will need power, they will need roads, they will need jobs. So in a private company going, they know that we will need to electrify this city. We will need to be able to have power, not just for the population, but also the industries there. So it is a joint communication that unfortunately, and I would say because there is a lot of intermediaries that they're thinking about just on doing the project, having the revenues. And that's really the problem, because later the projects are not viable or the project have problems. So I think the communication is what is missing. And unfortunately, and this is something that I have learned now that I'm in private sector, is unfortunately the communication of each one of the stages are different. And you have to speak on the language of each one of them to be able for all of them to understand the importance of projects. Clearly, I will conclude with that, clearly, we need to focus that there is 3 key problems that all African countries have: energy crisis, food crisis, and manufacturing crisis. And we have to be able to work on how we can achieve, and the more important factor that will fix all is a reliable electricity. If we do not have reliable electricity, we cannot do the projects. We won't be able to process, and we won't be able to create jobs.
Andrew, I just want to go back to that calculus you mentioned earlier that determines whether it is worth pursuing. It must be commercially viable and socially valuable. Reflecting on that $2.5 billion deal that you just closed with the government of Algeria, talk to us in practical ways how that calculation played itself out in terms of commercial viability and social valuability. Because bankers financiers on the one hand, manufacturers, producers, and extractors on the other hand, and government on the as a part of that troika, all have a different way of how they view social value, right? They all have a different way of how they view commercial viability, because they're all going into it with different incentives. In that $2.5 billion deal, you should have had to find common vision and common ground to be able to achieve that and make sure that it plays itself out. Take me into the calculation of commercial viability and social value in that experience.
Okay, let me first tell you that this is not the only mega deal that Elsewedy had since the past 5 or 10 years. Elsewedy has been present in the continent since more than 30 years now. It's an 80 years company, and we've got an annual turnover of almost 5.1 billion USD yearly. So the idea of commercially viable is how to find the good opportunity and the correct timing, and how to make it socially valuable. This is the most important thing about it. So let me tell you, for example, we've got like several key business sectors in which we've got manufacturing and services and project management, as well engineering and construction. So in the engineering construction, we don't leave an opportunity without digging and getting it early adoption since the start on how to integrate the local communities and how to create capacity buildings in the countries and transfer the knowledge that we have throughout the communities that we work in. So it's not only about giving trainings to the people that work with us in the local communities, but as well as creating local technical academies that can fill the gap between the market and the newly graduates. So normally we get some of these graduates that work in our premises, in our factories. We've got 34 factories worldwide for the manufacturing of cables, of transformers, electric transformers, metering systems, and cable accessories. So normally we take some of them that work in our premises. So this makes our impact viable throughout the community. And this is what distinguishes our company from the rest of the companies, that we don't go just to the country to do one job and leave. We would like definitely to keep an impact in these countries and how to create local communities that are capable, even in our PPPs that we create in the countries, that are capable to sustain and maintain these assets that we have built in these countries.
I like that you say you're not just coming in for one project to leave, because nuclear is such a fascinating part of the energy matrix, is that of all energy sources, it has the one that requires you to have the longest patience and vision, right? Because the timelines on it are so long, from production to, of course, getting it up and running. And that often requires intensive capital on the front end, with, of course, great rewards on the back end. But it requires that patience. It requires you to be rooted in the places, the communities, the countries where nuclear projects are being pursued as an energy source.
Right.
And I would imagine that if you're a private player, you're a bit worried about the patience of the government on the one hand in getting it up.
I agree. I mean, so nuclear energy, let's make sure that we demystify nuclear. Nuclear energy is no different than any other energy infrastructure project. And also, you know, this perception that it takes forever to launch a nuclear power program is not quite accurate. I mean, so let's look at the United Arab Emirates. They've gone from 0 to 25% of their electricity coming from carbon-free nuclear energy in less than 15 years. 0 to 25%. Bangladesh is going to go from 0 to 10% of their electricity coming from nuclear in 10 years. So let's be clear, this perception that it takes a long, long time to develop a nuclear project is being actually true in OECD countries, because we've lost those capabilities to do anything big, any major infrastructure project. But clearly in China, in India, in Korea, in UAE, in many other parts of the world, in Egypt, in Turkey, these projects are coming very, very quickly. At the same time, you are right that a nuclear power program is a long-term investment, because these nuclear units are going to operate for 60, 80, 100 years. So yes, there is a big capital investment for the next 5-ish, 10 years that is going to result in a long-term generation of energy that is very constant price, very stable, and again, for many decades. So this is, as you said, a perfect opportunity to capitalize or bring together the stability and the long-term vision of the government, together with the profitability and the commercial opportunities that these projects bring with us. And I think that what we heard here is very important for all energy projects, but is particularly true for nuclear energy in the sense that the socio-economic opportunities, the trickle-down economic development that comes with nuclear is very important. And let's please remember, it's not just the nuclear power plant that is going to produce the electricity. Let's look at the entire value chain from uranium mining, which of course is a key piece of the puzzle in Africa, to all the supply chain, all the ancillary industries that are going to be created with nuclear that are essential. So I agree with you. I mean, and I think that we heard this several times here, that these partnerships where we share the risk, but also the benefits and the opportunities of these infrastructure energy projects are essential and are particularly so for nuclear.
Yeah. Haytham, I want you to talk to us about what instruments the public sector has and that it can optimize and deploy to make energy infrastructure projects bankable that perhaps it underutilizes. I mean, we often think that government is just but the regulator player and it makes available the necessary licenses, the necessary permits, but it has other instruments at its disposal that perhaps aren't always utilized optimally. What are some of those that, from the banking side, you would like to see them deploy, not just for the purposes of skin in the game, but also efficiency and bankability?
Okay, so let's face it. Though the bankability and project preparation piece is what's really missing to get those projects up and running. And I'll tell you from the banker perspective, we talked about this huge gap in oil infrastructure on the continent, but when you look at the number of projects that are actually happening, it has no relationship to this big gap. And the reason for this is for those public-private sectors or other projects to happen, they need to be translated to the banker's language, which is become bankable. The idea is great, but it doesn't make sense. No investors will touch it. Let me help you to make it bankable. So a lot of the tools we will use with them is how to use this consortium between the government being in the agenda, giving it power, and the private sector experience to make bankable projects. Once it's bankable, there is a lot of interfaces that we now do. Like, for example, in a lot of those partnerships, we did a lot of reserve-based lending where they monetize the reserve under the ground for this project for the next 5 years. And this is critical for the success of these projects and for the government to fund. Because let's face it, when the governments get rated, they don't take what they have underground in their balance sheet. They don't say they have 40 billion of reserve, let's add it to their balance sheet, it's zero. But the time you start to put structure with your bankers where you bank the future proceeds of this, you get it into your balance sheet, use it on those private-public projects. There's a lot of work that we do on working with the private sector for them to accept the government risk and also to invite external private sectors. All of these projects are interesting to the whole world, but when they put it in their calculator and they start to calculate the risk, it goes off the chart. It's unfair to Africa because if you look at Africa, number of banks who collapsed, like what we see in the US and Switzerland, is less, but still something we need to work on. So we work with the private sector to package the risk on the way they can digest. The other big thing that we've done, which is very strategic to get the public fund to support the private projects, is when we started with Apple, what we call the Africa Energy Bank. If you look at it, it's really, the main shareholders for this bank will be governments. And if you look at it, it's actually government's money going to a bank to support private sector to do projects that they're interested in. So it's a very sophisticated form of PPP at next level of using government capital to finance private projects that the government likes. So we're utilizing the capital to leverage, get funding, give it to private sector to do projects, because the government by itself, if they do it, you will have your own hurdles. and you need this private sector agility to do it. So there's a lot of format now that we're doing between those, and we're trying to get even more innovative to find out how to encourage them both. But it all starts with bankability and preparation. And as I always say, you need to go to the doctor early. You start a project without going to the doctor early, you will be designing something that no one will buy.
Yeah. I want to ask you a question, and I'm quite sneaky in asking you a question because there's a follow-up question that I want Mr. Gabriel to respond to. And that is on governments being excited and often saying, look, we don't have capital now, but we'll put our sovereign reserves on the line as a government guarantee to this project. Let's get going. Does that share and dilute the risk for you as a banker?
Yeah, we have a lot of structures like this. Actually, you can get the government to put just guarantees. We don't need their cash at this one point. And in some time, we can just use natural resources they have to pledge future proceeds, to pull it back. The main thing is what really government to understand. For us to strengthen Africa and these projects, unless we start to invest in our banks and make them stronger, we're going nowhere. We can speak in all this week about energy infrastructure. Nothing will happen if you don't understand that in China, the size of banks behind these projects and these PPPs are much bigger than we have in Africa, because government to understand that they need to put equity and they need to put liquidity in these banks will give them back multiple times, will carry projects for them. Because that time what they do is they put their funds outside, and then when they go to borrow, they tell them, no, you don't have the right rating, we'll not give you your money back. Or we'll give it to you at double the rate you gave it to us with. This is what we're living in. We have to change it to get all these PP projects off the ground, strengthen our African banks across the continent to carry us, because we look bad having 3% of the energy while our rightful share is 17. We have a long way to go to build.
Yeah. And Mr. Gabriel, so that is then the follow-up question. Oftentimes, what we do see is governments not being ambitious enough to say, look, we believe in this so much, we'll put our sovereign reserves on the line as a guarantee to the financing instrument if it's debt-backed, right? And part of that is two reasons. I think one, governments are often, particularly in the global south, accused of working in silos. The finance minister's doing his own thing, the energy minister's doing his own thing, the minister of planning are, speaking in a different direction. And oftentimes the head of state just cares about getting re-elected, hopefully, and just being able to make sure people have water and food more than thinking about the complexities of some of these projects. How do we coordinate it in such a way that the Minister of Energy can often get the buy-in from the Federal Reserve as well as the Finance Minister to be able to use those instruments as leverage?
I think my experience and what I have and I will recommend is it's not it's not rocket science. It's not complicated. We already have examples of developing countries that are not in Africa who have done it. And the best example that I will mention at that oil and gas is Trinidad and Tobago. And in Trinidad and Tobago, you have the office of the Prime Minister, where they have a steering committee. And in that steering committee, it is the Minister of Plans, Minister of Energy, and I believe the Minister of Finance too. So all the decision about oil and gas, they're actually having that meeting continuously. So for example, when they're going to approve an LNG projects or development projects, all those ministers are involved. And that's the example of Trinidad. Then you go into, even though China is not the best example, but China is very big in development plans. China, they keep talking all the time, 5 years plan, 5 years plan. And I think that's clearly one of the things that we need to focus, the importance of following the 5 years plan. In the 5 year plans, independently that the government change, even if a new minister comes, the new minister doesn't have to come with new ideas. They just need to follow what's already in the plan. Because in the plan, the government decided, and this is not just a decision of a minister. It's not just a decision of the parliament. It's not just a decision of the president. It's a joint decision that for 5 years, we need to achieve 200 megawatts. For 5 years, we need to achieve these numbers. And that allowed to go. So I will reiterate one more time, the role of Minister of Planning is extremely important. And unfortunately, like I said, many Africans, there is a competition between ministers. I want to prove that I do better jobs than yours. And clearly, the importance that the ministers work together is very critical. The example that I have in Equatorial Guinea when I was in the ministry, I was all the time having meetings with the Minister of Finance and even the Minister of Transport, even though I was not my obligation, but it was very important because whenever the issue of taxes will arrive, the issue of custom will arrive, they will already know, the minister, we already agree on this matter. And also that will allow that there will be a confidence on the entire government. So I will insist that one of the biggest problems that we are having is that lack of coordination. But again, it comes also with the fall of the private sector. And I want to insist on this because the private sector comes to sell a project. So they go whoever is going to buy the project. They don't go who is going to make the decision. So they say, I have this beautiful 200 megawatt plant and I want to sell it to this country. Now, that country needs 200 megawatt plant or it needs 50. He just wants to sell 200 megawatt plants. So the issue is to go and ask the Minister of Planning and the government, what do they need? And then if for any reason they want to build this 200 megawatt plants, but the demand is 90 megawatt, they need to talk with the Minister of Planning Industry how they can add a project that is able to absorb the remaining megawatts that need to be done. So those are key things that we need to be able to align. It's like building a highway. You know, you give each company the different highway. If they are not coordinating, one road will go that direction, the other one. So I insist again on that matter because I do have experience with the bankers, with the projects, and those joint steering committees are very important. And the joint steering committees that I mean, it's not just by government. I think it should be with the bankers, with the operators, all of them together, continually to evaluate how the projects are going. Because the majority of the projects in Africa, they all start, they have a big party, we all drink, we eat about it, we talk about it, we have a big news that we started, but the majority of them, they are never executed correctly. They have overrun or they are not properly. So those monitoring is very important, and that's what I will recommend. It will be the best solution to do that.
Yeah. Andrew, what sort of capabilities do you look for in a market before deciding to deploy your resources and time there?
It's not only one decision or it's not only one study. Actually, it takes a lot of perspectives that have to be studied first. But most of all is this market really in need of these projects? So we need to create these jobs. We need to create this gap of energy or not. So normally, for example, we work in parallel in both the PPP channel and on the other side as well for the EPC plus finance projects. So normally in countries, in our countries in Africa, we've got a footprint in 110 countries, and we've got projects right now in almost 30 countries apart from the factories. But apart from this, we look first for the EPC plus finance if it's something that's urgent for the government, is something on the government's priority. So this is where we can come with the EPC plus finance project. So let me give you a bit of an example in Egypt, in where we had executed 4.8 gigawatt, which is recognized until today the largest power plant ever executed in one phase, because it was an urgent priority for the government. So that's why we created it on a fast-track project. In 2.5 years, all the project was already executed and injected on the grids. And on the other hand, we were working closely with the government also on creating a PPP of it was recognized one of the biggest power PV plants, solar PV plants in the whole world, in which we participated by the investment in 130 megawatt. So normally we go in both ways, depending on the urgency and the priority level of the government. And on the other side, we've got good relationships with most of the African governments, in which we've got very good footprint and good references in all African countries and in the whole world, as I mentioned before. But let's talk about first the South-to-South collaboration. If the country does not evaluate or value value the South-South collaboration. And if they're looking only for other parameters, then this is not our place to be. We would prefer the place that in their government, they prioritize the South-to-South reinforcement, as well as reinforcement the banking, the African banking presence in our countries. We would like always, we are open and we are working with international DFIs, with international ECAs, but we are definitely looking into also reinforcing our presence in collaboration with African banks such as, and most importantly, Afreximbank, with which we have already executed large number of projects, and we're proud to be one of their biggest clients, in which we served so many governments across Africa.
Yeah. Just the last question I want to bring up, Sama, I want to ask you this question as well as Haytham. Energy is political, and we can't ignore the fact that energy is political. And oftentimes when something's political, there are competing interests. On the one hand, you have the government having to listen to its people and take into consideration its industrial needs, its energy needs, and its economic needs. But on the other hand, it has to listen to the lobbyists who are environmentalists to say this is not the right type of energy projects to pursue. Let's rethink that, and they use whatever instruments. In South Africa, we have famous cases of the courts being used to be able to stop investment into hydrocarbons, for instance, and even now into nuclear. And environmentalists often arguing it's not safe. Not only for the environment, but it's not safe because we don't have the capabilities, particularly for nuclear, to ensure sufficient storage. And oftentimes that stands in the way of governments pursuing aggressively the right sorts of projects or projects that seemingly can do well. There's an ambition of about 15,000 megawatts of nuclear by sovereigns on the continent by 2035. Given those competing interests, how can we get there?
Well, I have to say that today, in most continents in the world, we are taking politics and dogmatism out of the progress and energy policy equation. So in most places, we are actually looking very clearly at the very important role that energy abundance, energy that is 24/7 is essential to growth and to prosperity and to socioeconomic development. So clearly, Africa is no different. We see that many countries in Africa are looking at nuclear energy, as well as many countries in Africa are not looking at nuclear energy. So one thing doesn't change the other. I think that the sustainability case for
Why
nuclear...
is that? Is it an information
asymmetry? It is a matter of... there is no one-size-fits all for a perfect energy mix. It depends on the natural endowments of different countries. It depends on, as you said, the political views, the social views, many reasons. So some countries, many countries in all continents are looking at nuclear energy as an essential piece of a 24/7 affordable clean energy mix. But some countries don't need it. If you have lots of hydro, for example, perhaps you are not looking at nuclear in the same way as other countries aren't. But so let me just say, the sustainability case for nuclear is clear. If you look at the recent COPs, countries are looking at nuclear energy as an essential tool to achieve climate goals in a manner that is yes, timely, yes, cost-effective, but very importantly, particularly for underdeveloped continents such as Africa, equitable, meaning that everybody can have access to all the energy that they need when they need it. So the sustainability case is clear, and I think that politics, again, is no longer part of the equation. You've seen the reversal in all continents: Europe, North America, Central Asia, South ASEAN countries, Africa. So I think that most continents, more countries are really looking, what we've been discussing here, the long-term progress and growth of the country. And frankly, when we are talking about these public-private partnerships, there is a third component that often has been non-existent, which is the off-takers, the energy users. So maybe a few decades ago, the off-takers were waiting for the government, waiting for the utilities, waiting for somebody to put the energy on the grid or the energy on the pipelines or whatever. I think that off-takers right now are actually being very proactive, being part of this conversation.
Haytham, up until about 2018, hydrocarbons were the elephant in the room. You couldn't invest in it without being looked at in a certain way until Russia invaded Ukraine, COVID-19 happened, and the tide started shifting on understanding that you need a multiplicity of energy sources to be able to be energy sustainable. And of course, that meant it was political, right? Many African nation states were signatories to the Paris Agreement on the one hand, and banks, the shareholders of banks started saying, what does the ESG policy look like? And suddenly that becomes a governance issue, and less money is available if it doesn't pass the ESG score. And of course, that matrix has changed over the years. But for you to commit into an African energy bank that takes hydrocarbons into consideration means the tide is changing, is it?
Yeah. This is a really game changer, what we do, because Africa's, what was happening was totally unfair to Africa. When you see a major withdrawal from finance of oil and energy that Africa hardly need, and suddenly now in the last year you see a rush back into financing oil and gas from the same people who look down at oil and gas. And I think we cannot take it in Africa like this anymore, because people need to understand that the Africa context is different from the whole world. Africa consumes only 3% of the world. What are we transitioning from? We have nothing to transition from. Two, what we need to understand, we have countries that depends totally on oil and gas now for their total GDP. You cannot unplug this and create a disaster in the country. Three, half of Africa, 600 million, don't have electricity. They use wood at home. They die, they get suffocated. 500,000 of them die every year because they don't have electricity. And the world doesn't understand this. They think everybody goes home and switch on the light and enjoy the TV. It's not. So the issue is, what are we transitioning from? So what happened is that we had to create this energy bank. We had to make sure that in the second thing, Africa will always have money to fund it. Especially that when you look at the emerging market, you have China 1.4 billion, India 1.4 billion, Africa 1.4 billion, but our 1.4 billion have 50 plus different brains. They have 50 plus different countries, and we're competing with totally coordinated brain on the other side. This means that our projects does not talk to each other. Someone opening refinery is opening refinery. So we need to optimize what are we financing, how can we coordinate, and this oscillation that we see in financing by using something like Energy Bank and the other moves that we do is at least start to be regularized. We don't have on and off mode of let's invest in energy. Energy today is bad. No, energy is good today. It's time for Africa to own their own destiny. And that's why in our session, the Minister of Petroleum for Nigeria said, what are we transitioning from? We still don't have our fair share to transition from it. And I think inviting all government to put money in this bank, it's a humongous bank that we're building, because once they put it there, they will guarantee that the decision to finance their oil is not taken by the whole world, it's taken by Africans for African.
Yeah, well, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much to all my panelists. Really do appreciate it. Let's give them all a big round of applause for their insights this afternoon. Thank you very much, everybody. Achieving energy, making energy poverty history by 2030 is the goal, and I think some of the insight here has been incredible towards achieving that. Let's just take a quick photo here as we prepare the stage for the next set of panelists who are going to come up.